Namo Buddhaya, the Satasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutram, the large sutra on perfect wisdom, the chapter 54th, demonstration of the development of skill and means. Training in skill and means. Subhuti. How, O Lord, should the Bodhisattva, the great being who courses in the perfection of wisdom, make a complete conquest of emptiness? How should he achieve the emptiness-concentration? How should the four applications of mindfulness be developed? How should he gain mastery over the right efforts? How should the right efforts be developed? So, with the basis of psychic powers, etc. The Lord. Here, Subhuti, the Bodhisattva, the great being who courses in the perfection of wisdom, should contemplate form, etc. is empty, and he should contemplate in such a way that when he contemplates, his thought doesn't get disturbed. With his own thought undisturbed, he doesn't review his own dharmas. Not reviewing his own dharmas, he doesn't realize. And why? Because that bodhisattva, that great being, should train in all dharmas as empty of own marks, and so he doesn't bring about the separation of any dharma, either of one who would realize, or of one which would realize, or of one through which he would realize. All these dharmas he doesn't review. Subhuti. As the Lord has just said, empty dharmas should not be realized by the Bodhisattva, the great being. How then does the Bodhisattva, the great being who has stood in emptiness, is realized emptiness? The Lord. When Subhuti, the Bodhisattva, the great being, contemplates the emptiness furnished with the best of all modes, he doesn't contemplate, I do realize, I will realize, or I should realize. He contemplates, I will gain mastery, and not I should realize. He contemplates that this is the time for effecting complete conquest and not the time for realization. Thus, unconcentrated Bodhisattva, the great being, ties his thought to an objective support. Meanwhile, the Bodhisattva, the great being, doesn't become destitute of the dharmas which act as the wings to enlightenment, but he doesn't realize the extinction of the outflows. And why? The Bodhisattva, the great being, becomes endowed with an exalted cognition. If having stood in the dharmas which constitute the wings of enlightenment, he discerns thus, this is the time for complete conquest, and it's not the time for realization. That Bodhisattva, that great being who courses in the perfection of wisdom, should surely contemplate. For the six perfections, is this the time for the development of the application of mindfulness? Is this the time, etc., for the development of the path of the concentrations of emptiness and the signs and the wishless, for the acquisition of the super knowledges of the concentrations, etc., to four analytical knowledges. But this is not the time for the realization of the fruit of a stream winner, etc., of the recognition of a Pratika Buddha. It is the time for the non-renunciation of the acquisition of the knowledge of all modes. It is thus, Subhuti, that the Bodhisattva who courses in the perfection of wisdom makes complete conquest of emptiness, and he dwells in emptiness. And so, with this silence of the wishless, he makes complete conquest, and he dwells in the wishless. He develops the Holy Eightfold Path, but he doesn't realize it, etc. He develops the application of mindfulness and dwells in them. It is thus, Subhuti, that the Bodhisattva makes complete conquest of the dharmas which constitute the wings of the enlightenment, develops them and dwells through them, but he doesn't realize the fruit of a stream winner, etc., to arhatship, the objective range of skill and means, the overcoming of hostile states. Suppose, Subhuti, that there were a man who is a hero, vigorous, of high social position, handsome, attractive, and fair to behold, endowed with the supreme excellence of loveliness and beauty. In nature he has gone as far as one could go. He is successful in warding off all manner of attacks, accomplished in all the 64 arts, and foremost in all crafts. He is dear and pleasant to many. Whatever work he may undertake will win him with much gain and honor, and for that reason he would be honored, revered, and worshipped by the many folk. More and more he would feel ever-increasing joy and zest. Taking his parents and children with him on some business or other, he enters on a wild forest. The foolish among them would feel terror and hair rise in fear. He, however, would fearlessly say to his family, "Do not be afraid. I will soon get you out of this fearful wild forest. I will protect you and soon set you free." If then many unfriendly, destructive, hostile, and inimical forces should rise up against him in that wild forest, this heroic man would be endowed with the power of supreme wisdom, having taken his parents and children out of that fearful forest, having set them free, he will securely and safely reach a village, city, or market town, a country district, or a place in a country district, and will dwell there full of joy and happiness, unhurt and uninjured. Nor does he become angry in his mind at those hostile and inimical beings. And why? Because he is well skilled in all the arts. In consequence, he can, in that wild forest, conjure up forces which are more powerful than those which oppose him, and all the forces hostile and inimical to him will flee in fright. And thereupon that man will dwell at ease after he has safely rescued his parents and children. Just so, at the time when the Bodhisattva dwells radiating towards all beings, a thought of friendliness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and impartiality, he does not on that occasion, through the realization of the signless concentration, get established on the level of the disciples or the level of the Pratika Buddhas. To dwell without support. A bird on its wings courses in the air and doesn't fall to the ground. It dwells just in space, just in the air, but it doesn't stand therein, nor does it get established therein. Just so the Bodhisattva achieves mastery over emptiness and dwells in the emptiness. He achieves mastery of the signless and dwells in the signless. He achieves mastery of the wishless and dwells in the wishless. But he doesn't realize emptiness, the signless, and the wishless in such a way that there is, as a result of this realization, he would fall on the level of the disciples of Pratika Buddhas without having completed the 10 powers of a Tathagata, etc., to the 18 Buddha Dharmas, the great friendliness and the great compassion. But having coursed in innumerable Buddha Dharmas, he reaches the knowledge of all modes, the carrying out of the vows made in the past. It is as with a powerful master of archery, well trained in archery, he would first shoot an arrow upwards and would then, by regular succession of other arrows, prevent it from falling down on the ground. In fact, the first arrow would not fall down on the ground until that man would decide that it should do so. In order that the first arrow should fall onto the ground, he doesn't send up the last arrow, with the result that the whole succession of arrows fall under the ground. In the same way, a Bodhisattva who courses in perfect wisdom and who is upheld by skill in the means doesn't realize that farthest reality limit until his wholesome roots are matured in the Supreme Enlightenment. Only when those wholesome roots are matured in the Supreme Enlightenment, only then does he realize that farthest reality limit. Therefore, then Subhuti, a Bodhisattva who courses in perfect wisdom, should thus contemplate and meditate the dharmic nature of these dharmas, the skill which is uncommon, Subhuti. A doer of what is hard is the Bodhisattva, if he trains in this dharmahood, in the reality limit, in the dharma element, etc., in the 3 doors to freedom, and yet doesn't collapse midway before he has known full enlightenment. Wonderful is this, O Lord, most wonderful, O Sugata, the Lord. For Subhuti, all beings have not been abandoned by the Bodhisattva, the great being. As he has not abandoned all beings, he can have this extraordinary vow. The Bodhisattva whose thought aspires thus, all beings should not be abandoned by me, they should be set free. When he proceeds in dharmas which are not, if he aspires to the concentration of emptiness, the signless, the wishless, which are the doors to freedom, the Bodhisattva should at that time be known as endowed with the skill in means. But he doesn't midway realize the reality limit until he reaches the knowledge of all modes, the skill which is unattached. Moreover, Subhuti, when the Bodhisattva, the great being, becomes one who wants to contemplate these very deep stations, the emptiness of the subject, etc., to the emptiness of the non-existence of own being, the 4 applications of mindfulness, etc., to the holy eightfold path, the 3 doors to deliverance, this thought should aspire thus. For a long time, those beings through the perception of a self, of a being, etc., of one who feels coarse in the basis, so that they may forsake the view of a basis. I will, after I have fully known the utmost right and perfect enlightenment, demonstrate dharmas. At that time, the Bodhisattva, the great being, enters into the emptiness-concentration and door to freedom, but he doesn't realize the reality limit, by the realization of which he would attain the fruit of a stream winner, etc., to pratika Buddha enlightenment. And the time when the Bodhisattva, the great being, develops the silence, concentration, and door to freedom, at that time he enters the silence, concentration, a door to freedom, but doesn't realize the reality limit, by the realization of which he would win the fruit of a stream winner, etc., to arhatship or pratika Buddha enlightenment. Thus, Subhuti, the Bodhisattva, the great being, endowed with this production of thought and with these wholesome roots, doesn't midway realize the reality limit, nor does he become destitute of the four trances, etc., to the Buddha dharmas. Thus, Subhuti, does the Bodhisattva, the great being, at that time become endowed with all the dharmas which constitute the wings to enlightenment. But he doesn't fail until he fully knows the utmost right and perfect enlightenment. The Bodhisattva, the great being, who has been taken hold of by skill and means, grows in pure dharmas, and his faculties become keener, unlike those of the disciples and pratika Buddhas. The skill which is without basis. Moreover, it occurs to the Bodhisattva, the great being. For a long time, those beings have coursed in the four perverted views, in the notions of permanence, of ease, of loveliness, of self. For their sake, I will, when I have known full enlightenment, demonstrate Dharma to the effect that they may form the habitual idea that this is impermanent, ill, unlovely, and not self. Endowed with this production of thought and with skill and means, he courses in the perfection of wisdom. He doesn't enter on the concentration of a Buddha before having completed the 10 powers of a Tathagata, etc., to the 18 Buddha dharmas, the great friendliness and the great compassion. At that time, the Bodhisattva develops the doors to deliverance, which consist in the concentration of emptiness, the signless and the wishless, and enters upon them, but he doesn't realize the reality limit until he fully knows their supreme enlightenment. Moreover, the Bodhisattva thinks to himself, for a long time these beings have coursed in a basis, in a self, a being, a living soul, etc., to one who does, one who feels, one who knows, one who sees in form, feeling, etc. For them I will act in such a way that when I have fully known the supreme enlightenment, the beings will not have the faults connected with assuming a basis, endowed with these productions of thought, and with this skill and means, he courses in perfect wisdom and does not realize the reality limit without first having completed the 10 powers of a Tathagata, etc., to the great compassion. At that time, the door to deliverance, which consists in concentration on emptiness, reaches for the Bodhisattva the fullness of its development, the skill which is silence. Moreover, the Bodhisattva who courses in perfect wisdom thinks to himself, for a long time these beings have coursed in science, in the science of woman, man, in the science of form and the formless. For those beings I will act in such a way that when I have fully known the supreme enlightenment, they will no more have these faults. Endowed with this production of thought, and with this skill and means, he courses in perfect wisdom and doesn't realize the reality limit before he has completed the 10 powers of a Tathagata, etc., to the great compassion. When he is endowed with that production of thought, then at that time the door to deliverance, which consists in the consideration of the signless, reaches for the Bodhisattva the fullness of its development, the skill which is without wishes for the future. Moreover, the Bodhisattva, the great being, who courses in perfect wisdom, thinks to himself, for a long time these beings, under the influence of hopes for the future, have been eager to become chakras, brahmas, world guardians, or world rulers. They have been eager for forms, etc. For their sake I will, when I have fully known the full enlightenment, demonstrate Dharma to beings to the effect that they see the faults of having hopes for the future. When the Bodhisattva, the great being, Through these wholesome roots and through these skill and means courses in the perfection of wisdom, then the door to freedom, which consists in the concentration of the wishless, arrives and the fullness of its development. But he doesn't realize the reality limit without having fulfilled the 10 powers, etc., to the great compassion, and until he has fully known the supreme enlightenment. It is impossible, it cannot be that a bodhisattva, a great being, who courses in the 6 perfections, in the various kinds of emptiness, in the 4 applications of mindfulness, etc., to the Buddha dharmas, and who has made a complete conquest and is thus endowed with vision and cognition, should fall into there unaffected or become intimate with what belongs to the triple world. That cannot possibly be. The skill, which is the token of irreversibility. Moreover, the Bodhisattva, the great being who courses in the dharmas, which act as wings to enlightenment and makes a complete conquest, may be asked, how can a Bodhisattva who wants to fully know the supreme enlightenment after he has coursed in the dharmas, which act as wings to enlightenment and made a complete conquest, manage not to realize emptiness or to penetrate the reality limit, with the result that might reach the fruit of extreme winner, etc., to partake of Buddha enlightenment? How can he realize emptiness, the signless, the wishless, the unaffected, non-production and non-existence? And how can he develop the perfection of wisdom if the Bodhisattva, when thus questioned by Bodhisattvas, would explain that just emptiness should be attended to, just the signless, the wishless, the unaffected, non-production and non-existence should be attended to, and yet all beings should not be abandoned? Then one should know that the Bodhisattva has been predicted by the Buddhas, the Lords, to the Supreme Enlightenment. And why? Because he indicates the complete conquest of an irreversible Bodhisattva, great being, declares and exalts it. If a Bodhisattva, when questions, explains that not should a complete conquest be made of emptiness, of the signless, the wishes, the unaffected, of non-production, of non-existent, but one should make a complete conquest of the dharmas, which act as wings to enlightenment, and one should not hang on to all beings, then one should know that this Bodhisattva has not been predicted to the supreme enlightenment. And why? Because he doesn't indicate the complete conquest of an irreversible Bodhisattva, doesn't declare or exalt it, and in consequence the Bodhisattva, the great beings, should know that the Bodhisattva, having made a complete conquest, has transcended the stage of an irreversible Bodhisattva, the skill which is unlimited in its subjective range. Subhuti. Is there in some manner in which a Bodhisattva is irreversible? The Lord. He is irreversible if, having heard the 6 perfection, he answers as an irreversible Bodhisattva would. He then should, by the Bodhisattvas, be known as irreversible. Subhuti. There are, O Lord, many Bodhisattvas who course towards enlightenment, but few only who answer as an irreversible Bodhisattva would, either on the preparatory or the non-preparatory stage. The Lord. So it is, Subhuti, so it is. And why? Because few only are the Bodhisattvas who have been predicted to the reversible stage in which this cognition becomes possible. But those who have been predicted to it, they will give the correct answer. One should know that they have planted splendid wholesome roots, and that the whole world with its godsmen and asuras cannot overwhelm them. This is the end of 54th chapter of the large sutra on perfect wisdom, the Satasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutram.